Hi there, I'm Tracy Smith, and here comes the sun, a closer look at some of the people, places, and things we bring you every weekend on Sunday morning. Author Fran Lebowitz seems to have something to say about almost everything and everyone. We wanted to find out why she's so driven and asked our Mo Rocca to go along for the ride.
I was on a plane, and the guy sitting next to me was on his phone the whole time, and I thought, what is he doing? He was playing a game where it looked to me like he was murdering fruit, killing fruit. What does he do when he's not doing this? I'm hoping that one day I'm not wheeled into surgery and this guy is like my surgeon, you know?
As always, an extended version of their conversation is coming up later in the show.
It's very interesting to me that companies care so much about their employees. I would think if I was an employee of a company, I would really just rather pay me more. Okay, just pay me more. I don't care how you address me so much. I don't care the atmosphere. In no way do I imagine that people who own corporations care about their employees. There's zero possibility that that's the case. And I don't know why people don't see that.
The South Bronx means many things to many people. To Congressman Ritchie Torres, it's home, which is where John Dickerson caught up with him.
This is the poorest district in the country. What does that mean?
More than half the residents in the South Bronx pay more than half their income toward their rent. And that's before you factor in the cost of food and transportation and utilities and prescription drugs.
At just 33 years old, Richie Torres represents the 15th in Congress.
It's all just ahead. We'll be right back. Her sardonic sensibilities have endured over the decades as an author, speaker, and even Netflix show host. Want opinions on Fruit Ninja, Hemingway, and smoking in public? She's got 'em. Here's Mo Rocca with Fran Lebowitz.
Did you have strong opinions as a child?
I did, but no one cared about them.
So who did you give them to?
Well, I tried to tell them to my parents, but when I was a child, I had to go to sleep. My bedtime was 7:30, till I was like 13. So I once said to my mother, why did you make me go to bed so early when I was like 12 years old? And my mother said, to tell you the truth, by 7:30, I just couldn't listen to you anymore.
Most writers write for a living. Fran Lebowitz talks.
Yes. Yes.
And at a recent appearance at Connecticut's Ridgefield Playhouse, she weighed in on everything from marathons.
Here's what I would run 26 miles. If there was a German soldier behind me with a gun.
To costumes for pets.
Dogs don't need clothing. That's what the fur is.
To her own legendary lack of productivity.
I am such a slow writer, I could write in my own blood without hurting myself.
She's been speaking her mind for half a century.
This is my favorite thing to do. This is why I write.
From her days writing for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine in the 1970s, to her two best-selling collections of comic essays, repackaged into a single volume.
Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Fran Lebowitz.
To a Netflix series directed by her friend Martin Scorsese.
People want to challenge themselves. I find real life challenging enough.
Which brought her distinctly analog sensibility to a decidedly digital platform. Though technology has always sort of baffled her.
I was on a plane, and the guy sitting next to me was on his phone the whole time, and I thought, what is he doing? He was playing a game where it looked to me like he was murdering fruit, killing fruit. What does he do when he's not doing this? I'm hoping that one day I'm not wheeled into surgery and this guy is like my surgeon, you know?
We met Lebowitz at the famed Argosy bookshop in Manhattan.
I never loved Hemingway. There's, in my opinion, really such a thing as too butch.
Apart from a children's book in 1994, she hasn't published a volume of new writing in 40 years.
I must have all of these books.
But audiences don't seem to mind. And yes, she's got something to say about audiences.
Every single thing, there's standing ovation. There is over-enthusiasm on the part of the audience. who has absolutely no way to judge the thing to begin with. I went to the ballet, maybe now 10 years ago, and I was shocked by the audience. So the second the first dancer put their foot on the stage, the audience erupted in cheers. I was shocked by this, okay? It used to be, if Baryshnikov managed to hang in the air for maybe, say, a full 15 minutes, they'd be like, okay, so the audience is, who are they applauding? Themselves.
Lebowitz grew up in Morristown, New Jersey, where the reception to her wasn't exactly warm.
Our parents did not pay the kind of attention to us that people pay attention to their children now. They felt that their job was to instruct us. Like I would say to my mother, "Can I please have an apple?" My mother would say, "May I please have an apple?"
Well, she was right.
I would say, "May I please have an apple?" She would say, "No." Okay, so that was childhood in the 1950s, not just mine.
Leibowitz's scholastic record was not without its blemishes.
I was expelled from high school.
For what?
The headmaster sent a letter, and the letter just basically said, she is a bad influence on the other girls and is usurping my power.
Perhaps a certain revolutionary wardrobe choice was to blame.
There was a Halloween party, where you wore a costume, and I had a friend who, I don't know where they got it, they had a Castro mask, and it was really good. It really looked like Fidel Castro. And I went with a cigar to this girls' school for Halloween, dressed as Fidel Castro in the 60s, and was suspended for this.
In fact, Lebowitz, who is gay, has never been particularly radical.
Sometimes kids come up to me in the street and say, "Thank you. Thank you for fighting for our rights." I didn't fight for your rights. I didn't fight for my rights. I just tried to avoid these problems. That's what I did. I didn't. Thank you for fighting for gay marriage. I never fought for gay marriage. We never heard of it. It's these two words together didn't exist, and who wanted it? Not me. I'm not against it. I'm glad you have it if you want it, but no thanks.
Lebowitz has been a vocal advocate for rights of a different sort.
Fran Lebowitz is a writer and a diehard defender of the right to smoke.
I know that cigarette smoke annoys people. Other people's cigarette smoke annoys me. But there are no other laws in this country about annoyance. I mean, this is supposed to be, you're not entitled not to be annoyed. Here's the thing. It's an addiction. It is not, however, a character flaw. It is not a sign of immorality. It is just a bad habit.
Fact is, it's a vice that gives Fran Lebowitz pleasure. Speaking of which,
are people having enough pleasure these days?
I don't know, but I will tell you this. If you're not having fun now, you will never have fun. So if you're not having fun in your 20s, by the time you're my age, I will be long dead. But try to remember that Fran said, I should have had fun in my 20s.
As you can clearly tell, Fran Lebowitz is rarely at a loss for words, which is why we'll bring you more of her conversation with Mo Rocca in just a few minutes. But up next, the personal mission of young Bronx Congressman Ritchie Torres. The evolution of Richie Torres is a remarkable one. Today, you'll find him roaming the halls of Congress, but he started out as a shy kid from the South Bronx. John Dickerson met up with him there to discuss change in his hometown, in Washington, and in himself.
The 15th Congressional District in New York's South Bronx has a number of distinctions. It's home to Yankee Stadium and the Bronx Zoo. It's one of the most democratic districts in the country.
Good to see you. How are you? How's everything? Good to see you.
And something else.
This is the poorest district in the country. What does that mean?
More than half the residents in the South Bronx pay more than half their income toward their rent. And that's before you factor in the cost of food and transportation and utilities and prescription drugs.
At just 33 years old, Richie Torres represents the 15th in Congress.
We can deliver real people results that are going to affect their lives.
For him, the issues that Joe Biden has staked his presidency on, reducing inequality, overhauling the social safety net, are not as abstract as the Build Back Better term used to describe them. For Torres, they're personal.
Apartment 2A, and so that second floor window,
So that's the window you looked out
Yes.
of. And what are you looking out that window thinking when you're growing up?
Thinking that there's a whole world of opportunities waiting for me.
And that might seem like a bold thought, given that Torres grew up in chronically underfunded public housing in the Bronx.
I'm someone who grew up with a whole range of challenges, right? I've had family members entangled with the criminal justice system. I've had to face housing insecurity and food insecurity. But the one constant that I had in my life was a stable, affordable home.
Richie Torres and his sister and twin brother were raised by their single mother.
There were moments when we could not afford to have 3 meals a day. You know, my mother would lurch from one low-wage job to the next, and so our income varied widely.
And what kind of jobs did she have?
Mechanic, food server, just a whole range of low-wage jobs.
Mechanic, car mechanic?
Yeah.
The motivations that would drive a future congressman were all around him. As a teenager, he helped care for his grandmother after she was widowed and in declining health. But he learned he could only do so much. What was that experience like?
Painful. It's painful to see people you love who were the leaders of your family, the strong matriarchs of your family, struggle in their final years and become shadows of their former selves. And it's part of the reason I feel so strongly about home care. I want for every elder in America what I would want for my own grandmother.
In high school, he was captain of the law team, leading his school to win New York City's moot court championship. He entered New York University full of promise, but faced a personal crisis that cut his studies short.
I was hoping that I would graduate and go on to law school or go on to become a teacher. But during the latter years of my high school time and then during my early college years, I came to struggle with depression. And so I dropped out. There were moments when I thought of taking my own life because I felt as if the world around me had collapsed.
Torres sought therapy, started taking an antidepressant, and found his way back by immersing himself in local politics. He ran for the New York City Council, despite calling himself an introvert.
I would have to drink 1 glass of wine before every speech.
He won, becoming the youngest member ever to win a city council seat.
We uncover evidence of
After 6 years, Torres ran for Congress, becoming the first gay Afro-Latino representative.
The most important lesson that my mother taught me is never forget where you come from.
He has the idealism of youth, but recognizes politics has limits. Some moral debates, for example, are distractions. So I'm a Democratic candidate out there somewhere, and my Republican opponent is mischaracterizing critical race theory. Do I answer those mischaracterizations, or do I talk about prescription drug costs with the bulk of my remarks?
I would focus on prescription drug costs, because if you conduct your campaign on the terms set by your opponents, then you're going to lose.
Moderates must win, or Democrats will lose the majority.
I'm in a deep blue district. I'm in one of the most democratic districts in America. And so I'm respectful and mindful of the perspectives of members who are on the front lines, who are in purple districts, and who have a feel for swing voters much more than I do.
Let's rebuild America. We talk about it a lot.
And half a loaf is better than no loaf, which might mean whittling down social policy legislation to win the vote of moderate Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. As a progressive, why put all this blood, sweat, and tears into electing Democrats and marching and speaking passionately about these issues if a West Virginia senator is going to call the tune for what the party believes in?
I refuse to allow progressive purity to be the enemy of progress in the real world.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And for me and for the district that I represent, an expanded child tax credit, home care, affordable prescription drugs, child care, all of these represent progress.
Torres will be able to see the results when he visits his mom, who still lives in the apartment of his youth. How will the lives of the people who live here improve if President Biden's legislation gets signed?
We're finally going to have the opportunity to bring public housing into a state of good repair. So none of it is sexy. None of this is
but we're going to replace elevators so that disabled residents are no longer prisoners in their own homes. We're going to replace boilers so that people have consistent heat and hot water in the winter. We're going to bring people closer to the ideal of safe, decent, affordable housing.
For Richie Torres, it's key to giving the next kid like him some reason to look out the window and hope.
When people ask me how my mother raised 3 children on minimum wage, I describe it as mission impossible. But there are mothers who pull it off, who manage to remain hopeful in the face of real deprivation. And it's, in some sense, a miracle. And it's that triumph of hope that inspires me and sustains me every day.
You think human nature is bad?
I mean, human nature is bad. That's why they call it human nature, not human art.
As promised, more from author Fran Lebowitz after the break.
And most of those tempting.
Once again, here's Mo Rocca with Fran Lebowitz.
You think human nature is bad?
Yeah, this is surely not an opinion. I mean, human nature is bad. That's why they call it human nature, not human art. Most people tempted with certain things will give into that temptation. And most of those first of all, most of those tempting things most people don't get tempted with. So they don't get tried and they don't know how they would act. But if you've been tried, if someone's waving money at you, or something else that you desire, and you say no, then you know. But that's not many people. It does seem to me, by the way, very adolescent or even pre-adolescent, this concern of what other people think all the time. I mean, the upside of being old, is that you don't care. And that's the only upside. I'm not recommending it, but not that you have a choice. I remember the first time I heard the phrase trigger warning, which I think now is out of style already.
But I mean, companies, right? It's part of their policy to issue trigger warnings or the equivalent.
I know. It's very interesting to me that companies care so much about their employees. I would think if I was an employee of a company, I would really just rather pay me more. Okay, just pay me more. I don't care how you address me so much. I don't care the atmosphere. In no way do I imagine that people who own corporations care about their employees. There's zero possibility that that's the case. And I don't know why people don't see that. Starting, I would say, in the early 90s, corporations started borrowing the language of poets. And they started talking about their vision and their mission and, their environment. And, it was shocking to me that people bought this. All businesses are the same. It doesn't matter whether it's a lemonade stand, or Amazon. A business is an entity, the single purpose of which is to make a profit, period.
So when you think about your past, is there a particular time that you tend to go to more than others? Is it your childhood? Is it when you first came to New York?
No, I can't think of any particular time that I think about more frequently. I grew up in a small town. We were not allowed to stay in the house. In other words,
get out.
Right. So most of the mothers, of the era and the class that I was in, middle class, people, the mothers didn't work. So the mothers didn't feel guilty not spending enough time with you. They spend more than enough time with you. So that if I, on a Saturday, was lingering over lunch for 1 second, my mother would look up and go, "Get out of the house. Get out of the house." So that, they didn't want us in the house. Get out of the house. Where? They don't care. Children were brought up pretty much alike. And also, everyone's parents were allowed to yell at you.
Oh, right. Other parents could yell at you.
Yeah, and did.
Because you can't do that today.
Oh, are you kidding?
You'll go to jail.
You can't even slightly suggest that perhaps they might not want, you can't do that at all. So, but if you did something wrong, it could be another part of town, that mother would call your mother, she may not even have known, and tell your mother, you were seen doing this, and your mother would thank her, and then when you got home, you would get punished for doing this wrong thing. And she would thank the other woman for saying, "Thank you for telling me what a horrible child I have." Not that I didn't know. And so our parents didn't know a lot of things about us. We never would have told them. They also, they just weren't that interested in us. My father used to say, "I work hard all day. I don't come home so I can listen to your theories." The only thing I remember my mother ever saying to me about my future was when I was like 14 and we were doing dishes, which seemed to be like, nonstop. She said to me, you should marry a college professor because you like to read so much. If you married a professor, you would always live in a place where there were a lot of books. I happen to have been, by the way, not that you asked, an excellent daughter.
I have no doubt.
I would say, if there was a Nobel Prize for being a daughter, I would get it. But I could never make up for not having gone to college, and I could never make up for not having gotten married and had grandchildren.
I thought that the pandemic might be a time when people would sort of think more about AIDS, and there might even be some sort of reckoning about what happened and how all those victims were treated. It doesn't seem to have happened.
Because everyone's dead. That's why. And that is something that is very hard to explain to people because there's no context for it. There is no context for what it was like to be gay then. I tell you what angers me. It angers me a lot when I read something that a young writer writes where they describe someone, who say, was 30 in 1970 or something like that as being in the closet. This was everyone. This was everyone. Because, we used to use that term, gay people, but we meant pretended to be straight to us, to other gay people, not to straight people. You couldn't have a job. You could not have a job. Gay bars in New York were 100% owned by the mafia. They were all owned by the mafia. Why? Because gay bars were illegal. They were illegal because it was illegal to be gay. And the cops in every neighborhood, which they used to have, like neighborhood cops, they knew where the gay bars were, okay? And so they didn't raid them because they were paid off. But when they would, periodically, there would be raids of gay bars. Just like periodically, they would be arresting hookers because the streets were full of hookers. And they would do this always during an election year because someone running for something was going to run on this. I'm going to clean up the streets. I'm going to clean up the hookers, and I'm going to clean up the gay bars. And when this would happen, and they would arrest everyone, the next day, the names of every single person arrested would be in the paper. And as soon as that happened, every single person named in that story would lose their job. 100% of people would lose their jobs, okay? And that didn't matter whether your job was, you were selling shoes at Bloomingdale's or you were a heart surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital, it made no difference. You were fired, and that was the reason you were fired. So when AIDS first happened, you could pretend not to be gay, but you can't pretend not to be dead. I really believe, I know this is not a very popular way of putting this, without AIDS, I don't think you'd have gay marriage. I don't think you've had all these things because it pushed everything into the public. When people say, oh, COVID is like AIDS, I say it's nothing like AIDS. First of all, people care about COVID, and they did right away.
I'm Tracy Smith. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Here Comes the Sun.